She had a similar experience at her gallery when an unexpected painting appeared in their exhibition that was exploring the themes of immigration.
When we found out about that secret immigrant to our exhibition, that small painting, we started a call out on social media asking who the artist was, and that we are very curious to learn more about him or her. So that from then on it went pretty quick. So she answered, Dana Emanuelidis. And she was a young student, not an art student, funny enough, a student of the law. So yeah, she was more of a hobby artist, but she engaged very much with the issue that we were dealing with in the exhibition.
More on the website. Stay with us here on BBC News. Mathew's here next.
Hello there. It got quite cold last night as the weather briefly calmed down. Things are going to be warming up over the next few days, but at the moment we've got all this cloud streaming in from the Atlantic. Those two weather fronts bringing spells of rain, but the wind direction is changing. We're getting a southwesterly wind and that will bring in that warmer air. Now today temperatures aren't going to be too high because we've still got a lot of cloud around, some fog over the hills, but 14 or 15 is an improvement on yesterday. Still have the rain, and the rain is going to be heavier across the hills of western Scotland still for a while, but that second rain band will push its way southeastwards overnight, the rain becoming light and patchy, and we'll see clearer skies following towards the north. But we still have that southwesterly breeze, so it's going to be a lot warmer than it was last night for many parts of the country. Temperatures are going to remain in double figures. And tomorrow sees more sunshine around as well. Some early rain in the far north of Scotland clears, a few spots of rain through the English Channel and southernmost parts of England and Wales. Could stay a bit cloudy. Next area of rain arrives in southern Ireland, but across the UK it's probably going to be dry in most places. And with some sunshine around in that southwesterly breeze, it will be warmer. Temperatures back up to 19 or 20 degrees. But there are some more weather fronts coming in from the Atlantic once again. They are going to return northwards, take more cloud and some wet weather northwards as well. So we'll see some rain pushing towards Northern Ireland and into Scotland, maybe even northern parts of England. Further south, after a bit of a cloudy start, we should see the cloud thinning and breaking and some sunshine coming through. And we still have those warm southwesterly winds. So these are the temperatures we're looking at on Friday. Let's compare those with the average for this time of the year. So Bury St Edmunds, 20 degrees on Friday, 6 degrees warmer than normal. And at Aberdeen, it's a similar sort of story, 6 degrees warmer than normal. A pleasant day for many areas on Thursday and into Friday. Over the weekend, though, it will start to cool down again. The wind direction changes. Cooler air is going to push down from the northwest. Pressure is going to be falling as well. And with low pressure moving in, we're going to find more wet weather coming in from the northwest as well. Now, the fine weather will last throughout the weekend across southeastern areas of the UK, but even here it will turn cooler. Towards the north and west, though, an increasing risk of some showers.
It's really disheartening to see this amount of waste come forward. If it wasn't for us collecting them, they'd go to landfill or incineration.
I feel very proud. I want to encourage other black athletes to take up swim, bike, run and dream of becoming champions.
مادر دقیقا معنای زندگی آزادی بود. یعنی زنی بود که زندگی ساخت، عشق داد، در راه آزادی هم رفت.
В війні все одно, хто ти чоловік або жінка. Коли ракета потрапляє в будинок, а ракеті все одно, чоловіки, там жінки або діти помирають всі.
Inspiring short films from the BBC. Watch now on iPlayer.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Russia and Kazakhstan suffered the worst flooding in almost a century, forcing more than 100,000 people from their homes. We'll be speaking live to our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg. Muslims in Gaza mark the end of Ramadan with fears of an Israeli onslaught on Rafah. President Biden warns Benjamin Netanyahu he's making a mistake.
I think what he's doing is a mistake. I don't agree with his approach. I think it's outrageous.
A landmark review into how England's health service provided gender services to children finds they were let down by treatment that lacked firm evidence. And World Athletics announces it'll become the first international federation to award prize money at the Olympic Games. Hello and welcome to Verified Live. We start with flooding described as the worst in nearly 100 years in Russia and Kazakhstan. Thousands have been forced from their homes, cities under threat, evacuations ongoing. Well, the flooding in the Urals and western Siberia has been caused by unseasonably warm temperatures, which has melted the snow. In the Russian city of Orenburg, home to 500,000 people, the authorities said water levels had reached dangerous levels. Thousands of people have already left the city. Orenburg is downstream from the city of Osk, which was inundated when a dam burst last week. Well, let's go straight to Moscow and straight to our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg. And Steve, just give me a sense of the scale of this, first of all.
Well, the first thing to say is that spring flooding is common, right, in Russia. When winter turns to spring and the snow melts, we see flooding, but nothing on this scale. I mean, and it's beyond Russia, right? You mentioned Kazakhstan. 97,000 people have been evacuated from the flood zone in Kazakhstan. As for Russia, more than 12,000 people have been evacuated from their homes. You mentioned Orenburg. I think more than 7,000 people have been evacuated from Orenburg, and boats have been sailing around the city there, sirens wailing, people being called on to leave their homes in different districts of the city. So the scale is quite big, and there's an economic consequence here too. As far as we know, casualty figures are low at the moment. I've heard maybe 4 or 5 people have been killed over the last few days in this flooding. But it's flooding which has affected lots of communities, lots of settlements in the area of the Ural Mountains and western Siberia.
We're seeing pictures, aerial pictures of just the huge amount of territory that this flooding is actually hitting and impacting. Are the water levels still rising? Talk me through the amount of help people are getting on the ground.
The water levels, as far as we know, are still rising in Orenburg. And in fact, President Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, earlier today said that the situation was expected to get worse. In other places, water levels have fallen. For example, in the town of Orsk that you mentioned. It was quite interesting a few days ago. An angry crowd gathered in Orsk to vent their fury on local officials, on the regional governor of Orenburg, on the local mayor, who they believe didn't warn them in time that this flood was coming. They criticised Russia's Minister for Emergency Situations too. They didn't criticise the Kremlin, which is quite interesting. They were actually chanting, "Putin, help us, Putin, help us," as if the president sitting in the Kremlin in Moscow was the good Tsar, according to Russian tradition, someone that they believe could actually help solve their problems, give them compensation, make things better.
Exactly on that point with Vladimir Putin, has he said anything about this himself directly? We see him so vocal on international matters, the operation in Ukraine. What about something like this domestically, with people calling for him to step in? Have we heard from him at all?
So the official message from the Kremlin is that Vladimir Putin is across this completely. He's being kept informed. He is dealing with the situation, coordinating the situation. We haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen the pictures of this, and there's no suggestion at the moment that Vladimir Putin is going to visit the flood area. At the moment, the message is being put out there that the president is in full control of the situation, but we haven't actually seen evidence of that.
Steve Rosenberg live there in Moscow. Thanks very much for that. Thank you. Now, millions around the world are celebrating Eid today at the end of the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. But many Muslims in Gaza who are caught up in the war with Israel have foregone the customary food and celebrations, as our Middle East correspondent Hugo Bechega now reports.
A war that has killed tens of thousands and left much of their land in ruins, Gazans are marking Eid, the last day of Ramadan. Streets that in the past would have been bustling are now empty and destroyed. Families who would be celebrating are mourning lost lives. Amani Mansour came to remember her son killed in this war.
When I think about last Eid, it was the best one of my life because my son was beside me, in my arms, getting him ready. Everything he wanted, I did for him. I wish he was here with me.
In Rafah, dozens gathered outside what is left of the iconic Al Farouk Mosque. Amid the rubble, they laid out their prayer mats.
This day for me is heartbreaking compared to last Eid. I look at my children and I feel heartbroken. When I sit with them and I start to cry, feeling sad for the days that have passed.
1.5 million Palestinians are sheltering in Rafah. Israeli officials have vowed to enter the city to destroy Hamas, but those plans have faced international opposition amid fears an offensive here would lead to a humanitarian disaster. Pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is growing, even from his closest ally.
I think what he's doing is a mistake. So what I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country.
The Biden interview happened before the latest proposal for a ceasefire, but it shows the president's frustration with Israel. A deal would see the release of 40 hostages being held in Gaza in return for 900 Palestinians detained in Israeli jails. Hamas now needs to give its response, but this is the main hope to bring a pause in the fighting and much needed respite for Palestinians in Gaza. Hugo Bechega, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, let's look at the humanitarian situation. Joining me now is Inga Ashing, who's CEO of Save the Children. And thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News. How alarmed are you at the US and UK now openly talking about some sort of plan B for the Israeli incursion into Rafah?
So just to say that in the past 6 months of war, nearly 26,000 children have been killed or injured. And the war is among the deadliest and most destructive in recent history. Children and families desperately need a ceasefire and immediate, safe humanitarian access. More children have been killed in this conflict than in all armed conflict globally over the past 4 years. So I think that is important to keep in the back of your head. We cannot stress enough how catastrophic expanded military operations in Rafah will be for children and their families. So that is something that needs to be avoided at all cost. And of course, there is a need to find a sustainable solution for peace and ceasefire. So any initiative to achieve that we welcome, because the situation is catastrophic, to say the least.
There are 1.3 million people estimated to be in Rafah. Can you see any sort of logistical way that the civilians can be moved safely? Because the UN organisations have already made it clear they won't be part of any move to force people. Can you see a safe way of doing this so the Israelis can actually move into Rafah without large amounts of civilians being killed?
As far as we see it, an extended military operation would leave more than 1 million Palestinian civilians, as you say, including more than 600,000 children without nowhere to flee. So no, we don't see anywhere where it would be safe to move people, and we stand with the UN in their assessment and analysis of the situation.
Give me an idea in terms of your colleagues on the ground, what they are seeing hour to hour.
So as I said, I mean, this is the deadliest conflict that we have seen in decades. So of course, that is something that is very clear for our colleagues on the ground. It's incredibly challenging because the lack of humanitarian access, Save the Children and all other organizations are ramping up and preparing for a response. But due to the lack of access, we are not able to respond to the needs that we see on the ground as much as we would love to. The health situation among children is critical and has severely deteriorated across Gaza. 1 in 10 children are suffering from infectious diseases, and more than 2/3 of children have had diarrhea in the past 2 weeks, just to be concrete. We see overcrowding in shelters, a near collapse of basic sanitation and health facilities, and there's an absolute lack of medicine and medical supplies. So there is no infrastructure to even respond to the basic needs of the children in Gaza. So that is what we are seeing. And the situation are getting worse by the hour. We know that many children are at the brink of starvation. Almost 300,000 children under the age of 5 are at the risk of starvation as we speak. So it is an incredibly challenging situation on the ground.
So a really, really critical moment. Inga Ashing, we have to leave it there. CEO of Save the Children, thanks so much for talking to us live on today's programme. Thank you.
Thank you.
Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. You're live with BBC News. Now, the Post Office inquiry in London has been hearing evidence from Lord Arbuthnot, a leading supporter of the campaign for justice for the hundreds of branch managers who were wrongly convicted. Faulty accounting software developed by the Japanese company Fujitsu made it look as though post office workers were stealing. Lord Arbuthnot said he became frustrated and annoyed with the government's lack of drive to address sub-postmasters' concerns. Well, let's go straight to that inquiry, straight to our reporter Azadeh Mashiri, who's been listening to today's evidence. She joins us from central London. Azadeh, just take us through the key bits.
Well, Matthew, as you said, Lord James Arbuthnot has been campaigning on this issue for more than 14 years. He was a Conservative MP at the time when one of his own constituents became a victim, because remember the stakes here, more than 900 sub-postmasters were prosecuted because of this faulty IT system. Now, he's criticised not only the Post Office, but also successive governments for not having done more for the victims. Now, he has said that the Post Office was defensive, secretive, and accused them of blocking information getting to investigators. And when it comes to the governments himself, he says he highlighted the issues with the software nearly 2 decades ago, but that the response he got from successive governments was that the government, despite owning the Post Office, has an arm's length relationship with the Post Office. Now, he didn't take that response very well. He said it essentially is saying, no, not me, Gov, when he expected them to sort what he saw as a potential injustice out. And he said that that it's essentially not taking your ownership, accountability of your ownership. He also described it in a particularly colourful way. Take a listen.
if you have an organisation that is as important to the community as the post office is, then the people have got to be able to have proper control over it if the people own it. And there's a sort of democratic deficit that is popping up here if the government is refusing to take responsibility for it. And also, I know that Mr. Henry has been talking about the risks of owning a dangerous dog. You cannot say that the dangerous dog has an arm's length relationship with you if the dangerous dog behaves badly. So the whole process of arm's length control is a worrying one, it seems to me.
Now, I want to bring in David Enright, who represents hundreds of victims, sub-postmasters who've been impacted by this scandal. David, thanks for your time. What do you make of Lord Arbuthnot's testimony so far?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to recognise that Lord Arbuthnot is on a par with Alan Bates. At the end of his evidence, Sir Win Williams took the unusual step of paying him a particular note of thanks. And indeed, for myself and for the hundreds of people I represent, I would say, bravo, my lord. Now, you will recall that he first of all started championing the case of Joe Hamilton all the way back in 2009. He thereafter championed the constituents of 140 MPs. He engaged with the Post Office initially, expecting them to act properly, fairly. He soon came to the conclusion that they were being obstructive and defensive, and that he could no longer trust them. And he said that Paula Venables had broken her word to him and to Parliament. He lost complete faith in them and no longer agreed to work with them.
Now, we're also hearing right now from someone who chaired the mediation scheme in 2013 between the Post Office and the sub-postmasters, that's Sir Anthony Hooper. Now, in recalling some of that experience, he seemed pretty exasperated. What did you make of what he's been saying?
Yes, he did. Sir Anthony Hooper, a 20-year High Court judge and Court of Appeal judge, he said that the Post Office case, from its inception, was completely implausible. What he was saying was it made no sense that the Post Office would accuse postmasters of taking money when just days after stealing thousands of pounds, they would have to immediately reconcile their accounts with the Post Office. He said it was completely implausible.
All right, David, thank you so much for that. Now, Matthew, the Post Office has said that it is deeply sorry for the impact that this has had on victims and that it's cooperating with the inquiry. Meanwhile, this phase of the inquiry is trying to figure out exactly who knew what and when. So much of what we've heard today will be put to people like Paula Venables, the former chief executive of the Post Office, who will be giving evidence in the coming weeks. For now, this inquiry continues.
Today, thanks very much. Now, before we move on, I want to take you to the White House, show you the live pictures. That is President Biden. He's just meeting with Japan's Prime Minister at the start of a visit. He's been talking about the strong and growing partnership with Japan and the White House. This summit kicking off just there on the lawns of the south lawn of the White House. There was an arrival ceremony just a short minute ago. Now, some early comments. We'll keep across that. We'll keep an ear, and if there's anything significant that Joe Biden and the Japanese Prime Minister says, we'll obviously bring that to you. We're especially keeping an ear out for any further comments from the American President about the Middle East. Now, a major report into gender services for young people in England and Wales says that medical interventions given to under 18s are based on remarkably weak evidence. The report's author, Dr. Hilary Cass, says the long-term impact of using puberty blockers and hormones is uncertain and should only be given with extreme caution. England has joined a list of countries that are reviewing treatments for gender dysphoria. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has this report.
It's a landmark review with the stark conclusion that children had been let down because of remarkably weak evidence on medical interventions in gender care. This final report follows an interim review which has already led to major changes. Gender services provided by the controversial Tavistock Clinic in London ended last month. 2 new centres in London and Liverpool have been set up. The use of drugs to stop the onset of puberty has now stopped until further research is done. The author of the report says hormone treatment should in future be used with extreme caution for 16 to 18-year-olds and argues that children were let down by the quality of services.
It is unusual for us to give a potentially life-changing treatment to young people and not know what happens to them in adulthood, and that's been a particular problem that we haven't had the follow-up into adulthood to know what the results of this are. And that's the reason why I've said that we must improve the research base here.
Kira Bell started taking puberty blockers aged 16 after being referred to the Tavistock. She then took legal action, arguing she wasn't challenged enough at the clinic and regretted her decision. Her lawyer responded to the review findings.
Whilst it is very reassuring for young people who are going through gender questioning at the moment and their parents, that hopefully there will be a new service developed that will meet their needs appropriately, it is unfortunately for many young people too late. They live with the ongoing consequences of poor clinical treatment and their lives forever changed.
Expanding gender services is another key focus of this review. Recommendations include a separate pathway for young children and their families, allowing early discussions to take place, a follow-through service for 17 to 25-year-olds, and assurances that the same standards of care as other parts of the NHS will be provided. Sonia wanted to transition from the age of 15, but she found she couldn't get access to care and was put on a waiting list. By the age of 18, she hadn't had a first appointment and was transferred to adult services. After hearing there'd be another long wait, she opted to go private until she could be seen by the NHS. Sonia says the long delays were hard to cope with, but she hopes there'll soon be changes.
Hopefully, with the review and its findings, the young trans people of today and the next generations can have a more human and a more respectful transition that doesn't feel demeaning or demoralizing or like it's taking years upon years of just waiting.
NHS England says there'll be an implementation plan. For Sonia, it's the detail and the delivery which will count.
Hugh Pym with that report. Now, with just over 100 days to go till the Paris Olympics, there are concerns that the triathlon event could be delayed or the swim leg even cancelled because of poor water quality in the River Seine. That's despite more than €1 billion spent trying to actually improve it. From the banks of the Seine, our correspondent Hugh Schofield has sent this update.
The big picture is a good picture, so it's a positive picture. The big picture is that the river has been cleaned up extensively over the last 20, 30 years. It's far, far healthier than it was in the 60s when there were 3 species of fish left in it. Now there are 30 or 40 species of fish. So the general picture is a very good one, but the specific picture is rather more worrying. The specific picture is this bid to get the river swimmable in by the Olympics, which was a commitment that the Olympics organisers, which President Macron made, and which they insist is still on track. But there have been now these findings from an NGO which looks into water quality, which are troubling. This NGO called Surfrider has found that in a series of readings it took over the winter, the bacteria levels are too high. They're above the norms, and it's all scientifically kind of organised. Above a certain level you can swim, below a certain level you can swim, above you can't. And the levels were above that level. So there are assurances coming from the organisers saying, don't worry, winter water is worse than summer water. There are all sorts of things that have yet to happen which will continue to clean up the river in time. But one can't help thinking that they must be worried, and in the same way that there are concerns expressed about the opening ceremony on the River Seine and security, people are now saying perhaps there should be a plan B in case the water isn't clean enough by the end of July. I think the plan B, as I understand it, there are 3 events. There's the triathlon, there's the swimming marathon, and then there's the Paralympic triathlon as well. So 3 events. As I understand it, the fallback plan, if things go badly wrong, is that they can shift the date. They can move it around. They've planned it to be take place early in the games. And so if early in the games, and they last for 2 weeks, it looks like the river is not up to snuff, then they'll push it back later. But if that doesn't work, I don't think there is another plan. And of course, that's why there are all these assurances that they have things under control. But, you know, I think anyone watching is feeling a little niggle now that maybe they're talking confident, but they're not as confident as they look.
Hugh Schofield there on the banks of the Seine. Now, a two-storey houseboat, complete with a white picket fence, was towed through San Francisco Bay after the owners were asked to leave Redford City Marina. The floating home took the precarious journey across the bay to San Rafael. The boat was apparently one of dozens told to leave the marina as they were blocking public access to a state waterway. As part of an ongoing legal battle, the council offered compensation for that move. Incredible pictures. We're going to take a short break and back with more of the day's headlines here in just a moment or two. Don't go away.
Hello there. It got quite cold last night as the weather briefly calmed down. Things are going to be warming up over the next few days, but at the moment we've got all this cloud streaming in from the Atlantic. Those two weather fronts bringing spells of rain, but the wind direction is changing. We're getting a southwesterly wind, and that will bring in that warmer air. Now, today temperatures aren't going to be too high because we've still got a lot of cloud around, some fog over the hills, but 14 or 15 is an improvement on yesterday. Still have the rain, and the rain is going to be heavier across the hills of western Scotland still for a while, but that second rain band will push its way southeastwards overnight, the rain becoming light and patchy. And we'll see clearer skies following towards the north. But we still have that southwesterly breeze, so it's going to be a lot warmer than it was last night for many parts of the country. Temperatures are going to remain in double figures. And tomorrow sees more sunshine around as well. Some early rain in the far north of Scotland clears. A few spots of rain through the English Channel and southernmost parts of England and Wales. Could stay a bit cloudy. Next area of rain arrives in southern Ireland, but across the UK it's probably going to be dry in most places. And with some sunshine around in that southwesterly breeze, it will be warmer. Temperatures back up to 19 or 20 degrees. But there are some more weather fronts coming in from the Atlantic once again. They are going to return northwards, take more cloud and some wet weather northwards as well. So we'll see some rain pushing towards Northern Ireland and into Scotland, maybe even northern parts of England. Further south, after a bit of a cloudy start, we should see the cloud thinning and breaking and some sunshine coming through. And we still have those warm southwesterly winds. So these are the temperatures we're looking at on Friday. Let's compare those with the average for this time of the year. So Bury St Edmunds, 20 degrees on Friday, 6 degrees warmer than normal. And at Aberdeen, it's a similar sort of story, 6 degrees warmer than normal. A pleasant day for many areas on Thursday and into Friday. Over the weekend, though, it will start to cool down again. The wind direction changes. Cooler air is going to push down from the northwest. Pressure is going to be falling as well. And with low pressure moving in, we're going to find more wet weather coming in from the northwest as well. Now, the fine weather will last throughout the weekend across southeastern areas of the UK, but even here it will turn cooler. Towards the north and west, though, an increasing risk of some showers.
I'm not sure I've actually said this before. I came up there and I cried. Wow.
A symbol of friendship to some, panda diplomacy to others.
That world has eaten up and spit out a lot of young and attractive guys.
There's always more to the story with our podcasts. Listen on BBC Sounds.
Morning. Come and have a seat. Now, of course, I'm not going to go easy on you. There are some really big questions we've got to try and get answers to this morning. But I'll be fair, and we just want to hear what you've got to say. So, shall we get on with it?
We're rolling.
Here we go. Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg. Sundays at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
The art of good conversation is to say the right thing at the right time and in the right way. You have to be original, sympathetic, encouraging, and also keep an open mind. And you really do just need to sit back and listen.
Katty Kay chats with prominent names from the worlds of business, science and culture.
Influential with me, Katty Kay. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Welcome to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. Russia and Kazakhstan suffered the worst flooding in almost a century, forcing more than 100,000 people from their homes. Muslims in Gaza mark the end of Ramadan in the midst of destruction caused by 6 months of war and fears of an Israeli onslaught on Rafah. President Biden warns Benjamin Netanyahu he's making a mistake. A major review finds children in England and Wales have been let down by weak evidence about gender treatment. New Foreign Office figures reveal that more than a quarter of all UK overseas aid, some £4.3 billion, was spent last year on asylum costs at home. And with just over 100 days to go to the Paris Olympics, the River Seine water could be unsafe for athletes. Well, before we go to sport, let me just bring you some breaking news that has come in the last few seconds. Important news being reported by the Reuters news agency. They report that 3 sons of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh have been killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. That has come from a Hamas-affiliated news agency. Now, Haniyeh, since 2023, has been based in Qatar. But reports from the Reuters news agency, they are quoting the Hamas-affiliated news agency on the ground, saying 3 sons of the Hamas leader have been killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. So that is significant. We will try and find out more details on that in the coming minutes. But as promised, let's pause from that. Let's head to the BBC Sports Centre. Chetan has the day's headlines from there. Chetan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Matthew. Thank you. We start with news that athletics will become the first sport to introduce prize money at the Olympics in Paris this summer. The governing body, World Athletics, is breaking 128 years of Olympic tradition, becoming the first international sport to give athletes money for winning a gold medal at the Games. $50,000 will be the prize for those that win on the track or field. This in contrast to the International Olympic Committee, which does not award prize money. Our reporter, Matt Graveling, has been following the story for us.
Basically, they're the first federation to say, right, gold medalists are going to get money for winning a gold at the Olympic Games. And it's going to start as early as 107 days' time in Paris for this year's Summer Olympics. And basically, World Athletics have ring-fenced $2.4 million of the money that they get from the International Olympics Committee as a prize fund, and this is what's going to go to the athletes. And they also committed in 4 years' time, when the Olympics travel to Los Angeles, to also give a prize, a monetary prize, for the silver and the bronze place positions.
Well, in response to this, the International Olympic Committee says it's up to each international federation and National Olympic Committee to determine how best to serve their athletes. The president of World Athletics, Sebastian Coe, has called the decision a pivotal moment.
This is just a recognition that the athletes are the stars of the show. We increased the prize money in our own championships a few years ago. And I just wanted the athletes to recognise that we don't sit here hermetically sealed, assuming that their performance at an Olympic Games doesn't have a beneficiary knock-on for the growth of our own sport.
Now, in the last hour, the NFL has given more details on its history-making first ever regular season game that will be played in Brazil later this year. They've confirmed that it's the Green Bay Packers that will face the Philadelphia Eagles in Sao Paulo on September the 6th. It'll also be the first NFL game in over 50 years played on Friday night of opening weekend. 2 more matches to come in the European Champions League on Wednesday as the quarter-finals continue. Atletico Madrid are at home to Borussia Dortmund, whilst Paris Saint-Germain face Barcelona. Barca boss Xavi will step down from his role at the end of the season, and ahead of this game, his opposite number at PSG, Luis Enrique, who played alongside Xavi at Barcelona and later coached him, believes he represents the values of Barcelona better than Xavi does.
No es una opinión. It's not an opinion. Look at the data. Look in terms of ball possession, the chances on goal under the highest pressure. Look at the titles. Look at the trophies. Without a doubt, me. Obviously, there are others who think differently, but without a doubt, it's me.
And Tyson Fury says he's feeling confident that May the 18th will be his night as he edges closer to his undisputed world title fight against Alexander Usyk in Riyadh. Fury's currently at an intense training camp ahead of his career-defining fight next month.
Actually, I'm having a fantastic training camp and got a good team around me and everything's going to plan. No complaints, working very hard. Got my dad in camp this time, so I've got my secret weapon over there as well. I got Ty Mitchell in, I got all the boys, all the girls are in camp, so we've got a full circus camp. So yeah, can't do any more really.
Tyson Fury there. We'll have more sport for you later, but that, Matthew, is all for now.
Chetan, thanks so much. Thank you. Now, in what appears to be a deepening rift between the US and Israel, President Biden has described Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of the war in Gaza as a mistake. Speaking on American television, Mr. Biden said he did not agree with the Israeli Prime Minister's approach. He called for a 6 to 8 week ceasefire to allow unlimited food and medicines to enter Gaza. The comments mark a significant shift from his previous position that it was up to Hamas to agree to a truce and release Israeli hostages.
I think what he's doing is a mistake. I don't agree with his approach. I think it's outrageous that those three vehicles were hit by drones and taken out on a highway where it wasn't like it was along the shore. It wasn't like there was a convoy moving there, etc. So what I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire. I've spoken with everyone from the Saudis to the Jordanians to the Egyptians. They're prepared to move in. They're prepared to move this food in, and I think there's no excuse to not provide for the medical and the food needs of those people.
Let's speak now to Brad Bowman, who's Senior Director of the Centre on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defence and Democracies. Thank you so much for being here live on BBC News. How serious would you say the rupture in relations is between Biden and Netanyahu? You have Biden saying multiple times it would be a mistake to go into Rafah. Netanyahu not only ignoring that, apparently, but not even telling Washington what the date he has in mind.
Thanks for the opportunity to join you. There's been two things going on for several months now. One is, I would say, escalating political pressure from the Biden administration toward Prime Minister Netanyahu, even as U.S. weapons have continued to flow to Israel following the worst single-day attack on Jews since the Holocaust. And there's no doubt that that political pressure from Washington escalated significantly over the weekend, and President Biden's most recent comments are among the most acute. It is certainly true that there are dire humanitarian needs in Gaza. It's also true that Israel has enabled significant flows of food, water, and medicine into Gaza, but it's not nearly enough. And I think that the more Israel can facilitate that, the more time they will have to go after Hamas, who started all of this, of course, on October 7th with that terror attack.
Yes. What does it tell you, though, that Netanyahu, he was supposed to have given Washington his plan for Rafah? That still doesn't seem to have happened. And you then ended up with that press conference yesterday with Antony Blinken and David Cameron talking openly about having to make contingencies, plan Bs, for what would actually happen if that ground offensive actually happened. What do you make of a scenario like that, with the US supposed to be the principal ally?
The United States is the principal ally for Israel, and maintaining that relationship, I think, is an existential matter for the state of Israel. You're right. The tension is most acute regarding Rafah. I mean, you have a good portion of the remaining Hamas combat power that is residing in tunnels under Rafah, and right above them are 1.2, 1.4 million Palestinian civilians. So there's different ways to address that. The Israelis are saying we can't leave them there to conduct another October 7th on a day and time of their choosing. And so there's talk about a Philadelphia corridor, where the Israelis, at a minimum, prevent them from replenishing their arms and then conduct periodic strikes. But in the meantime, I think a temporary ceasefire is probably where we're headed, hopefully, that will release more hostages, get more humanitarian assistance in, allow Israeli forces to refit, and then enable at some point in the future Israel to go in and get the remaining Hamas combat power in that area while minimizing civilian casualties.
Let me ask you a separate question on Ukraine, principally, because David Cameron is there in Washington. He's having a variety of meetings on Capitol Hill. We know he's already met Donald Trump. He was there with Antony Blinken yesterday. Much more alignment with the Biden administration, perhaps, than Republicans. What sort of reception is he getting from Republicans? Because he hasn't met, for example, the House Speaker, and that is the key to unblocking the blockage.
Yes, indeed. You know, it's notable that he met with former President Trump. He's having all the meetings you'd expect in Washington, you know, but all eyes are on Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson. He's the primary reason why we've had aid for Ukraine lingering for so long with such horrible consequences on the battlefield in Ukraine. And Speaker Johnson is looking at four audiences. He's looking at his Republican caucus overall. He's looking at the MAGA element of his Republican caucus. He's listening to what Donald Trump is saying, and he's looking at his constituents in Louisiana. So they're trying to cobble together some sort of formula now that allows him to do right by Ukraine and pursue U.S. policy there that is in the American national interest without losing his speakership. And that's easier said than done when he enjoys such a thin, razor-thin margin in terms of his Republican majority. So they're looking at things like LNG exports and things like that that would now enable him to retain his speakership and get that Ukraine aid passed.
Sure. A brief final thought then. Is there anything that David Cameron can actually do to impact significantly that dynamic you've just described?
I think it's important for him to highlight what Europeans are doing to help Ukraine, because there's a perception among some folks on the far right in this country that a lot of Europeans aren't carrying their fair share of the security burden and they're free riders on us. And so the more he can highlight what Britain is doing and other European allies are doing to help Ukraine so that to undercut that false narrative, I think would be helpful while he's in Washington.
Well, we have to leave it there. But Brad Bowman, thank you so much for joining us live here on today's show. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to briefly return to that breaking line that Reuters was reporting in the last 5-10 minutes. The news that they say 3 sons of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh have been killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. No exact location. They quote the Hamas-affiliated news agency Shabab in the last few minutes. No other details. Hamas's leader, of course, based in Qatar. But that report, and there's only one line so far, that 3 of his sons have been killed in an Israeli airstrike. As I say, we're trying to find out more details on that, and as soon as we do, we'll obviously return to it. Now to an entirely different story, because exit polls in South Korea are predicting a landslide win for the opposition party in parliamentary elections. The Democratic Party and other opposition groups are projected to win about 2/3 of the 300 seats in Parliament. If confirmed, the result would be a blow to the president's party. Jean McKenzie has sent more from Seoul.
The first thing to note is that exit polls in Korea are unreliable. They have been wrong in the past, and they don't take account of the early voting that's been happening here over the past week, and so we don't want to read too much into them. If they are correct, though, it means that the Liberal opposition party is on course to win a significant majority in the parliament. These elections, although just parliamentary elections, they don't decide the president. They are being seen as a midterm referendum on the current president, Yoon Suk-yeol, who's been in office for 2 years now. Now, he has been unpopular from the start, but neither side expected him to be punished this much. If his party does lose in a big way, it will weaken his authority and make it nearly impossible for him to be able to push ahead with his agenda and pass legislation. The big number that everybody is interested in is 200. This is what's needed to get what's called a supermajority here. And it means that if the opposition party and the smaller parties get 200 seats or more between them, they can join forces to push through laws the government doesn't want. The president will no longer be able to use his veto, and that could make politics here pretty chaotic. But we will have to wait until the morning here in Korea to find out the results for real and what they mean. But they could have big implications for how this country's run over the next 3 years.
Jean McKenzie. Now, the parents of a US schoolboy who killed 4 of his classmates in a school shooting in 2021 have both been sentenced to at least 10 years in jail. It is the first case of its kind. Ethan Crumbley's parents, James and Jennifer, were found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors said they were criminally negligent for giving a weapon to their son. He's currently serving a life sentence. Our North America correspondent John Sudworth has more.
Neither James nor Jennifer Crumbley pulled the trigger. But in a country where gun violence in schools is all too common, this was a legal first.
It is the sentence of this court, Ms. Crumbley, that you serve 10 to 15 years with the Michigan Department of Corrections.
The two now face at least a decade in prison for involuntary manslaughter as a result of the mass shooting carried out by their son. In 2021, they bought Ethan Crumbley, then 15 years old, a semi-automatic handgun as an early Christmas present. A few days later, he took it to school in his backpack and shot dead 4 of his fellow students. Last year, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But prosecutors claimed his parents also bore responsibility, arguing that they had failed to keep the gun secure and that they had been indifferent to the clear warning signs of their son's deteriorating mental health, with his diary entries suggesting they'd ignored his desperate pleas for help. And as she sent them to jail, the judge agreed.
But these convictions are not about poor parenting. These convictions confirm repeated acts or lack of acts that could have halted an oncoming runaway train.
Gun control campaigners hope the long sentences handed down will resonate across America in any home where children live in close proximity to guns. They were certainly welcomed by some of the relatives of the victims.
Ultimately, the responsibility was in their hands. They are the parents. They are the ones that control their son, and they have the power to do what needs to be done, and they didn't do that.
Legal experts caution that one case will do little to stem epidemic gun violence, but those frustrated by the lack of political action may take some comfort in the message being sent by a US court. John Sudworth, BBC News, New York.
Well, a really fascinating case. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. You're live with BBC News. Let's turn to the topic of migration. A couple of bits to bring you up to date with. Let's start here in the UK because the Foreign Office have just issued the latest figure, and it shows the UK government is spending even more of its foreign aid budget supporting refugees and asylum seekers in the UK. The Foreign Office statistics reveal that more than a quarter of all UK overseas aid, that's about £4.3 billion, was spent last year on asylum costs here in the UK. That's a 16% increase from 2022. So interesting new figures coming into us on that. And let's stay with that broader issue because the European Parliament is to vote on sweeping new laws to overhaul its migration policy. The issue of how to handle irregular arrivals of asylum seekers and migrants has been one of the most divisive debates among EU countries. And this new scheme is the result of 8 years of talks. Well, Sofia Betitsa explains more about the proposed changes.
This is a make-or-break attempt by the EU to control migration.
So how would it work? Well, at the moment, only a few European countries, Spain, Italy and Greece, are responsible for the vast majority of asylum applications. Now, this agreement brings in a new solidarity mechanism. Essentially, it's a trade-off. So the countries receiving most migrants will build detention centres on the EU's external borders. What that means is that migrants would be screened when they arrive, and authorities would have the option to detain them until their asylum claims are assessed. And if those claims are rejected, the migrants can be sent to a third country deemed safe. But in return, other European countries like France, Germany and Poland will have to accept more refugees or send extra money for border infrastructure. Now, most NGOs dealing with migrations have called this pact cruel. Amnesty International, for example, says that it will lead to a surge in suffering for asylum seekers. Now, the worry is that this new scheme will encourage more detention, including of children and families. But the EU says that it could lead to a breakthrough because a higher number of asylum claims being fast-tracked at the EU's external borders would lead to quicker and more efficient ways of returning illegal migrants.
Sofia Betitza. Let's return to Paris, where security has been stepped up for tonight's Champions League quarter-final match in the southwest of the capital. The Islamic State group has warned it might be planning to attack European football events, including the match between PSG and Barcelona at the Parc des Princes. The French government says there is no concrete threat, but the Interior Minister has said security has been considerably strengthened at the stadium. Well, let's get more on that from our correspondent Andrew Hardy, who's there for us.
A lot of police around, though. They've blocked off some streets, and I've seen them stopping and searching a number of people as they head towards the stadium. It's still a few hours away from the start of the match, and things will pick up later. We also know, though, that there's a bigger police presence, not just here, but around France in general and at strategic sites here in the capital. The French authorities, particularly with the Olympics coming up in just over 100 days, taking these security threats very seriously on the one hand, but also saying, look, we've heard these things before, we don't have specific details, we are very experienced at handling this kind of situation, and they're also talking up the fact that they've made a number of arrests and have actually thwarted plots in the last few months. We're hearing similar messages from Germany, from Spain as well, where there have been other plots foiled and more arrests. The Germans, for instance, also taking the unusual step of policing land borders, restricting and checking documents for people crossing later in the summer for the UEFA championships there. So a heightened concern, not least after the Moscow attacks, but also, I think, some caution about getting too concerned about this. What is new and I think interesting here is the extent to which the French see Russia as a troublemaking factor. The Kremlin being accused by the French of deliberately stirring things up to spread panic, to spread a lack of trust in the authorities here in Europe to handle these security threats.
That was Andrew Harding. Let's turn to a fascinating story, because one of Germany's largest art museums has sacked a member of staff after he smuggled one of his own paintings in and put it on display. The 51-year-old man hasn't been named, but he was reported to have worked as a technician at the Pinakothek Moderne in Munich and had out-of-hours access to the building. Well, Jonna Adams is an art curator at a nearby gallery in Germany. She had a similar experience at her gallery when an unexpected painting appeared in their exhibition exploring the themes of immigration.
When we found out about that secret immigrant to our exhibition, that small painting, we started a call out on social media asking who the artist was, and that we are very curious to learn more about him or her. So that from then on it went pretty quick. So she answered, Dana Emanuelidis, And she was a young student, not an art student, funny enough, a student of the law. So yeah, she was more of a hobby artist, but she engaged very much with the issue that we were dealing with in the exhibition. And that was, yeah, how people experience being othered in society, actually everyday racism in society. So what she did, she painted a model, an Australian model, who herself said that she always makes the experience to be considered like something else than like other people. So that was something she wanted, the artist wanted to address also in our exhibition, and we found that very interesting.
Well, let's end this half hour with this news that Beyoncé has made US music chart history again. But after her latest album, Cowboy Carter, took the #1 spot in the US Billboard Country Albums chart, it makes her the first black woman to top that chart since its inception in 1964. Beyoncé has spoken how the album was inspired by her experience of not feeling welcomed within the genre.
Hello there. It got quite cold last night as the weather briefly calmed down. Things are going to be warming up over the next few days, but at the moment we've got all this cloud streaming in from the Atlantic. Those two weather fronts bringing spells of rain, but the wind direction is changing. We're getting a southwesterly wind, and that will bring in that warmer air. Now today temperatures aren't going to be too high because we've still got a lot of cloud around, some fog over the hills, but 14 or 15 is an improvement on yesterday. Still have the rain, and the rain is going to be heavier across the hills of western Scotland still for a while, but that second rain band will push its way southeastwards overnight, the rain becoming light and patchy, and we'll see clearer skies following towards the north. But we still have that southwesterly breeze, so it's going to be a lot warmer than it was last night for many parts of the country. Temperatures are going to remain in double figures. And tomorrow sees more sunshine around as well. Some early rain in the far north of Scotland clears, a few spots of rain through the English Channel and southernmost parts of England and Wales. Could stay a bit cloudy. Next area of rain arrives in southern Ireland, but across the UK it's probably going to be dry in most places. And with some sunshine around in that southwesterly breeze, it will be warmer. Temperatures back up to 19 or 20 degrees. But there are some more weather fronts coming in from the Atlantic once again. They are going to return northwards, take more cloud and some wet weather northwards as well. So we'll see some rain pushing towards Northern Ireland and into Scotland, maybe even northern parts of England. Further south, after a bit of a cloudy start, we should see the cloud thinning and breaking and some sunshine coming through. And we still have those warm southwesterly winds. So these are the temperatures we're looking at on Friday. Let's compare those with the average for this time of the year. So Bury St Edmunds, 20 degrees on Friday, 6 degrees warmer than normal. And at Aberdeen, it's a similar sort of story, 6 degrees warmer than normal. A pleasant day for many areas on Thursday and into Friday. Over the weekend, though, it will start to cool down again. The wind direction changes. Cooler air is going to push down from the northwest. Pressure is going to be falling as well. And with low pressure moving in, we're going to find more wet weather coming in from the northwest as well. Now, the fine weather will last throughout the weekend across southeastern areas of the UK, but even here it will turn cooler. Towards the north and west, though, an increasing risk of some showers.
Get the BBC News app for breaking news live as it happens. Personalise the app to get your news your way. From local stories to global headlines. Stay up to date with the news that matters. BBC News. Download the app.
The world of film is changing faster and faster all the time. I've been reporting on cinema for more than 40 years. So what's it like to be an Oscar nominee? Our global Talking Movies team
How does that work on set?
brings you up to date on the latest in movie making from around the world.
Looking at stories from other cultures.
Interviewing top filmmakers and stars.
People seem to be emotionally charged by the film.
From blockbusters to art house cinema, we'll spotlight the brilliant and unique voices bringing their stories to the big screen.
Talking Movies. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Live from London, this is BBC News. 3 sons of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh have been killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza, according to a Hamas-affiliated news agency. Muslims in Gaza mark the end of Ramadan with fears of an Israeli onslaught on Rafah. President Biden warns Benjamin Netanyahu he's making a mistake and calls for a ceasefire.
What I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country.
Russia and Kazakhstan suffered the worst flooding in almost a century, forcing more than 100,000 people from their homes. A landmark review into how England's health service provided gender services to children finds they were let down by treatment that lacked firm evidence. And World Athletics announces it will become the first sporting federation to award prize money at the Olympic Games. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. We start with that breaking news coming to us from Gaza. News that 3 sons of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh and 3 of his grandchildren have been killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. That information is coming from the Hamas-affiliated news agency Shihab. We had brought you the breaking line about the 3 sons a little earlier, but the same news agency tweeting in the last little while about the death of 3 grandchildren as well. So 6 people in total. The Hamas leader, of course, not based in Gaza. He is based in Qatar since 2023. But that information coming into us all of the while. Let's go live to Jerusalem. Let's speak to BBC World Service Middle East editor Sebastian Usher, who's there for us. And Sebastian, these are early reports, but what are you hearing where you are?
Well, we have had confirmation from Ismail Haniyeh himself, who's spoken on Arabic media, saying that 3 of his sons have been killed. I'm not sure about the grandchildren, but I believe he's also said that about 3 of his grandchildren. Now, the reports are that they were in a vehicle that was struck to the west of Gaza City. There is video of the aftermath. The bodies have been blanked out, but they're supposed to show some of the grandchildren. So 1 son killed with one of his children, another son with one of his children, and a 3rd son who was killed in this strike. Now, there's been nothing so far officially from Israel. There's been nothing from the IDF. It has been reported in the Israeli media, but they are reporting what they're hearing from Arabic sources, the sources basically that you've just been referring to.
And Sebastian, I mentioned it there as I was just doing the introduction because Haniyeh himself, of course, for a long while hasn't been located in Gaza, has he? He is there in Qatar.
That's correct. He has been out of Gaza, but a large part of his family is in Gaza, and this isn't the first time during the past 6 months that members of his family have been killed. Another one of his sons was killed in February, also a brother and a nephew towards the end of last year. So there's been a heavy toll, as there has been on many families, obviously in Gaza, on the Haniyeh family as well.
Just a final question, a wider question, because we've heard again from President Biden in that American interview repeating what he'd already said, that it is a mistake. The current strategy from Israel is a mistake. It would also be a mistake going into Rafah. What is coming from the Israeli government to that pretty blunt assessment from Washington?
Well, the Israeli government has been fielding more and more criticism from President Biden over the past week or two, and it's been coming back very defiantly. And what we've been hearing, we haven't heard today, but we have heard in the last couple of days from the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who absolutely saying that there is no change in his military strategy, which is to go into Rafah, not saying exactly how. He said there's a date, but I mean, I think we can say that that isn't clear, but absolutely saying whatever